The mansion's ballroom gleamed like a theater stage. Warm lights reflected off the gilded mirrors, crystal glasses clinked, and the soft sound of a piano filled the room, where wealthy people paraded their forced smiles. Amidst all this, Carmen walked hurriedly with a tray in her hands, balancing champagne flutes. She was discreet, careful. After all, she had served this family for 20 years, and she knew very well her place. In the corner of the room, her son Diego, just 17, wore a simple dress shirt and black pants. He had come to help her at the charity event organized by Victoria Wittmann, the lady of the house, a woman known as much for her wealth as for the arrogant look she cast on anyone who didn't measure up to her social standards. The party, curiously, was a fundraiser for young people from underprivileged communities. But the irony was clear. The guests didn't really want to help, they wanted to be seen helping. It was then that, with a cynical smile on her lips, Victoria approached the center of the room and lightly tapped a glass with a spoon, beckoning for attention. Everyone fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, ... Since the theme of the evening is youth and talent, I thought of something fun. She turned toward Diego, who was serving canapes near the fireplace. Come here, young man. How about showing us how to play chess in the suburbs? The guests' muffled laughter spread throughout the room. Carmen froze. Her eyes met those of her son, who remained firm, wordless. She knew that look. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Come on, don't be shy, Victoria insisted. It's just a harmless game. I'm sure you at least know how to move the pieces. The Italian marble board in the center of the room seemed to gleam under the watchful eyes of the elite. To them, Diego was just a maid's son, a poor boy who would be easily defeated, and that, of course, would be the evening's entertainment. Carmen swallowed hard. That wasn't an invitation. It was a humiliation disguised as charity. But Diego stepped forward. Without changing his expression, he replied, "Excuse me, ma'am. It will be a pleasure to play." And in that moment, everything began to change. The room still echoed with muffled giggles as Diego approached the board with calm steps. He didn't tremble. He didn't look around. It was as if he were walking toward something he already knew. Carmen, from afar, clutched the tray to her chest, unable to hide the ache in her heart. Victoria sat like a queen on her throne, adjusting the silk scarf around her shoulders. Around her, businessmen, politicians, and socialites took their places, forming a sort of audience in curious silence. "Let's make the rules clear, dear," she said, smiling with false sympathy. "I always play with the white pieces. It's a family tradition. I hope you don't mind." Diego simply nodded and began arranging the black pieces with a precision that made one of the guests raise an eyebrow. He didn't make random moves. Each piece was placed exactly in the center of its square, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. "He's polite, at least," whispered a woman near the fireplace. "Polite and brave," added a man, laughing sarcastically. "If you challenged me like that in front of everyone, I'd run." But Diego didn't run. On the contrary, he gazed calmly at the board, his eyes focused, as if each square held a story, a hidden strategy. In that moment, he wasn't just a boy facing an arrogant millionairess, he was a player. "Let's make this interesting," Victoria announced, laughing. "If this guy can scare me just once, I'll donate $1,000 to some public school. Deal." The mocking applause resumed, but something was different. Some guests, like Mr. Hamilton, a well-known investor and former college chess player, began to pay closer attention. Victoria opened with the classic pawn on e4, the champion's opening. She commented, "I learned it at Harvard, on a table similar to this." Diego didn't hesitate. c5, Sicilian defense. The move wasn't common among beginners. It was bold, strategic, used by great masters. Hamilton choked slightly on his whiskey. "This defense. This boy is no amateur," he murmured to his wife. Victoria paused for 2 seconds, an almost imperceptible interval, but enough for Diego to notice. She was uncomfortable. That response wasn't expected, and that's when Carmen realized Diego's silence was his weapon. While the others talked, he observed. While they mocked, he studied. The boy she raised cleaning houses during the wee hours of the morning was there, in front of everyone, showing that even when no one believes, talent speaks for itself. The room didn't know it yet, but they had stopped watching a joke to witness something historic. And Diego, he had barely begun playing. The board was now the center of the universe. The glow from the fireplace reflected off the marble pieces, as if each held a secret about to be revealed. Victoria played with the confidence of someone who always won by position, not skill. But Diego, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance, it was knowledge. She played the knight to f3, another safe play. "This one's the knight," she said, turning to the guests as if giving a children's chess lesson. "It moves in L, did you know that?" The guests laughed, though no one really found it funny. Diego answered without hesitation. "Knight on c6, precise, calculated, theoretical opening." Hamilton shifted in his chair. Something was getting out of hand, but not for Diego. It was Victoria who seemed to be in unfamiliar territory now. The millionaire played d3, a timid move, lacking depth. Diego responded with knight on f6, positional, solid. His every move seemed part of a plan known only to him. "Our little boy is moving too fast," Victoria said teasingly. "In serious games, people think before they move." Diego didn't answer, but he did something unexpected. He pretended to think. Yes, he purposely paused for about 15 seconds and then played g6, preparing the bishop fianchetto, a complex move. Hamilton almost dropped his glass. That's the accelerated dragon setup," he whispered, almost to himself. "Dragon what?" his wife asked, frowning. "One of the most aggressive variations of the Sicilian defense. Few play it well." Meanwhile, Victoria crossed her legs and showed off her diamond necklace, unaware that she was being cornered. "At least he saw it in a movie," she mocked, "or maybe in some cell phone game." But Diego didn't need a movie or a cell phone. He had learned in the silence of the early morning, in the dim light of the kitchen, in the effort to study, alone when most people were asleep. Every move there was the result of years of hidden dedication. The game went on, and little by little, the guests' forced smiles gave way to arched eyebrows and restless looks. Victoria tried to maintain her composure, but something in her expression was beginning to crack. She made defensive moves. She played to survive. Diego played to win, and more, to teach. Carmen watched everything from her back against the wall, her hands clasped in her apron. In her eyes, there was no longer fear, only admiration. She knew her son, she knew his potential. But seeing Diego there, facing off against the woman who had humiliated her so many times, was something else. "This match will mark this room forever," Hamilton murmured, never taking his eyes off the game. And he was right, because with each new move, Victoria not only lost position on the board, she lost a bit of the authority she thought she possessed. Diego hadn't won yet, but everyone there already knew. He wasn't just the maid's son, he was the genius no one saw coming. The silence in the room now had a different tone. It was no longer the silence of those awaiting a spectacle of humiliation. It was the tense silence of those who realize something unexpected is happening. The guests began exchanging discreet glances, but no one dared interrupt the game. It was like watching a thriller that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Victoria adjusted her posture in her chair, trying to appear calm, but her fingers drummed on the armrest, betraying her anxiety. She advanced a pawn, trying to make room on the board. Diego responded with a perfect bishop, discreetly cornering an opposing piece. "That boy knows what he's doing," whispered Hamilton's wife, now more serious. "Did you see the last move?" "I did," Hamilton replied, barely blinking. "He's leading the game." She didn't even notice. Some guests, who had previously been laughing and drinking absent-mindedly, began to approach the board. They wanted a closer look. They wanted to understand how that boy, who just minutes ago was serving canops, was now controlling the pace of the game. "You look like you're having fun, don't you, dear?" Victoria said with a forced smile, moving another piece. "But don't worry, I'm just warming up." Diego remained silent. He simply made a quick, confident move, forcing her to move her queen back, an impeccable move. Some guests glanced at each other and even muttered a restrained wow. Carmen, leaning against the wall, felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't from fear, it was from pride. Victoria, sensing the audience's attention, tried to turn the situation to her advantage. "You know, sometimes we need to let beginners feel confident at first," she said, her tone ironic. "That way they learn more quickly the difference between an amateur and a real player." But the sentence sounded different than she expected. No one laughed. The atmosphere was charged, as if everyone knew this was no longer a game. Diego made another quick move. Victoria's bishop was in danger. She frowned, trying to calculate. The The silence in the room was broken only by the clinking of the waiter's glasses and the dull sound of pieces on the board. "He's playing better than I imagined," commented one of the politicians present, now leaning in to observe. "This boy is impressive." Victoria lifted her chin, but her expression betrayed her discomfort. Diego was in control. He moved the pieces as if he'd rehearsed every move. His confidence was beginning to sting. And then, suddenly, the whole room realized this game was no longer about chess. It was about something much bigger. Diego wasn't just playing against Victoria. He was challenging what she represented. Every move on the board was a reminder that talent doesn't depend on surname or wealth. Carmen took a deep breath. She felt something shift there, right before her eyes. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel invisible. Because Diego, her son, was showing the entire room that no one should be underestimated. And the best part, the game was just beginning. As the game progressed and Victoria sweated surreptitiously beneath her diamond necklace, Diego seemed unfazed. His eyes roamed the board with the calm of someone already envisioning the end, and not just the end of the game, but the end of everything that room represented. But no one there knew what truly drove that boy. No one imagined the path he'd taken to get there, with his fists clenched in his pockets and his mind sharp as a blade. At 9, Diego had found an old book in the trash at the public library, where his mother cleaned on weekends. It was torn and dirty, but still had a few pages intact. It was a beginner's chess manual. He hid the book in his backpack, as if it were a forbidden treasure. That night, at home, he opened it on the kitchen table and studied the pieces. Carmen came home from the second round with aching feet and red hands from the cleaning products. When he saw his son absorbed in those pages, he asked, "My son, why do you want to learn that game?" Diego replied without looking up, "Because the kids at school always say only rich people are smart. I want to prove them wrong." From that day on, everything changed. There were no computers. There was no internet, but there was a will. Every day, Diego walked more than 2 miles to the library to study. He checked out chess books, watched old games on public computers when they worked, and wrote everything down in a notebook with a crumpled cover. When the power went out, he used a candle. When Carmen came home exhausted from work, he helped her prepare dinner, and then went back to studying. He memorized famous openings. He repeated moves of champions. He imitated games by Kasparov, Fischer, Carlsen, and more than that, he created his own strategies. Diego was more than a chess student. He was an obsessive autodidact, and all of this, in silence. No applause, no encouragement, no one around but his mother, who watched from afar, her heart torn between fear and hope. In the present, in the mansion's living room, Carmen remembered it all. The 15th birthday when she could only offer her son a hug and a new notebook. The day she found Diego secretly crying after being unable to go to a competition because she couldn't afford the ticket. And now, there he was, sitting before a millionaire who had underestimated him in front of everyone, playing with the same calm with which he had learned to endure the hardships of life. But now, for the first time, being seen. And this was priceless. Victoria tried to hide her discomfort, but she could no longer control the subtle tremor in her fingers as she moved the pieces. Her smile, once arrogant, now seemed plastered to her face, as if it no longer fit in the moment. Diego, on the other hand, was serene. His hands moved with precision. His every move was like a chapter in a book he had written himself, and Victoria was just a supporting character. The tension was growing. Some guests began to gather even closer. They didn't speak. They just watched. It was as if they were witnessing something sacred, the moment when the game clearly changed sides. Diego sacrificed a pawn. At first glance, it seemed like a silly mistake. Victoria arched an eyebrow and smiled with relief. She thought he had faltered. He moved the piece as if regaining control. But then Hamilton choked on his drink. "No, that wasn't a mistake," he murmured. "It was a sacrifice. Intentional. He set a trap." Victoria hesitated. She looked at the board and, for the first time, didn't know how to respond. It was as if she was surrounded, as if every move she made led her to a dead end. Diego watched everything silently, but now there was something different in his eyes. He knew he had one. Not in the final score, yet, but in her mind. Victoria no longer played with confidence. She played with fear. It was at that moment that he slowly stood up, walked over to his mother, and said, in a low voice, but audible enough to echo through the room, "Mom, Remember when you said that one day I would show you who I really am? Carmen, her eyes brimming with tears, simply nodded. She remembered perfectly. It was one day when she came home from work, exhausted, and found Diego studying in the dark, the candle nearly out. He had nothing, only dreams. And now, here he was, achieving what seemed impossible. Victoria cleared her throat, visibly irritated by the interruption. Can we continue? I have commitments after this. Diego returned to the table, but something had changed. He was no longer just a talented young man. He was the truth laid bare before all those who believed social class defined intelligence. With his next move, he trapped Victoria in a double trap. If he protected the king, he would lose the queen. If he defended the queen, he would be checkmated in 3 moves. She froze. Her hands trembled more. Her eyes darted around the board, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. The guests, who had previously been merely curious, were now impressed. Even Congresswoman Jennifer Mills, who had barely peeked at the game at first, was completely engrossed. She turned to her husband and murmured, "That boy has something special." Hamilton said nothing. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the board. Victoria, for the first time that night, was speechless, and a faint smile appeared on Diego's face, not mocking, but knowing, deep down, that this was the moment everything changed. Victoria stared at the board, her eyes scanning the squares for some magical way out, but there was none. Diego's trap was set with the perfection of someone who had spent years studying not only chess but also human behavior. And in that moment, she was no longer the elegant hostess. She was simply a cornered opponent. "This doesn't make sense," Victoria murmured, trying to maintain her composure. "This sequence, no one learns it alone." Her voice trembled, and it didn't go unnoticed. For the first time, the room accustomed to seeing her in control watched her fragility, and that shook her more than any defeat. Hamilton leaned over the board, his eyes wide. "Victoria, he's put you in a conundrum with 2 paths, neither of which leads to victory." What she countered uncomfortably. "It's a rare sequence, extremely advanced. Most experienced players don't even risk it." And he acted as if he were joking. Victoria felt her face burn. She couldn't accept this, not in front of everyone, not the maid's son, not from that boy who, to her, should have been just part of the evening's decor. She moved a piece, desperate, an impulsive move, and with that, she fell straight into the trap. Diego said only one word, almost a whisper, "Check." The sound filled the entire room. It was just one word, but it had the weight of an avalanche. Some guests lowered their glasses, others held their breath. Victoria's eyes widened. You memorized this game from somewhere. Someone trained you for this. It was all set up." Diego just looked at her, serene. There was no anger. There was no arrogance. There was dignity. "I learned it from the books in the public library. Madame Man, from every sleepless night. While you slept in this very mansion." The sentence fell like a bolt of lightning. Carmen took a step forward, her eyes welling up. Her voice was low but firm. "My son would wake up at 5 in the morning to study before school. He'd walk miles to borrow a book because we didn't have internet. While I cleaned bathrooms, he memorized games in the dark, with a candle, because the power had been cut off." A deep silence fell over the room. It wasn't about chess anymore. It was about everything hidden behind the game. The invisible struggle, the silent effort, the talent no one wanted to see. Victoria tried to laugh, but the sound was forced. She tried to say something, but her voice faltered. For the first time in her life, the people around her weren't looking at her with admiration, but with judgment. "That's just luck," she whispered. Without further argument, Diego then moved the final piece. Simple, direct, checkmate. And in that instant, the game ended, but Victoria's humiliation was just beginning. Checkmate sounded like muffled thunder inside the elegant ballroom. The lights continued to shine, the piano still played in the background, but no one could hear it anymore. Everything seemed frozen. The White King, Victoria's fallen piece on the board, was more than a fallen piece. It was the symbol of a destroyed ego before everyone. Victoria didn't move, her eyes fixed on the pieces, as if hoping that, by some miracle, they would change position. But nothing changed. The reality was there, cold as the marble of the board she so flaunted. She had been defeated by the maids. "Son un impossible," she whispered, trying to maintain her composure. "You must have memorized that sequence. No one plays like that without professional training." Hamilton, who had watched the match from start to finish, took a deep breath and said aloud, "Victoria, that boy not only played like a master, he executed a variation of the Sicilian defense that not even I, with 40 years of experience, would have the courage to attempt." The guests began to slowly rise. Some still held their glasses in their hands, but no one was drinking anymore. It was as if the air had shifted in weight within the house. "I saw that," Congresswoman Mills murmured. "That boy played with surgical precision, and more than that, with class." Victoria stood up abruptly, bumping into some pieces on the board that fell to the floor with small cracks. "This was a setup," she snapped, her face flushed. "Someone trained this boy to humiliate me in here. This is a plot." Diego, still seated, looked at her with the same serenity as ever. His tone was calm, but charged with truth. "I wasn't trained to humiliate you, ma'am. I was trained by life to resist, to fight, to prove that intelligence has no zip code." Carmen approached slowly, as if the force of her emotion was pushing her closer to her son. Her eyes were watering, but she stood her ground. It was the kind of pride that couldn't be contained in her chest. It was the moment she'd waited for so many years, and perhaps hadn't even dreamed she would one day see. The guests, one by one, began to move away, but not before casting silent glances at Victoria. Not of pity, not supportive, but disapproving. "You embarrassed yourself," Hamilton muttered before walking away. Victoria recoiled, as if she'd been checked again. Diego stood, arranging the pieces on the board, as if to restore the order he'd just destroyed, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for the game. "Thank you for the game," he said, looking her directly in the eye. "It was educational." And then he turned to his mother. "Come on, Mom, I have school tomorrow." Carmen removed her apron, raised her head with dignity, and walked beside her son. The two of them passed through the guests in silence, but now everyone was watching. Everyone saw, and no one saw them anymore as the maid and the boy from the outskirts. They were, in that moment, what they truly were: winners. Carmen and Diego were almost at the door when a firm voice echoed behind them. "Diego, wait a moment." They stopped and slowly turned around. It was Congresswoman Jennifer Mills, still holding the coupe now, filled with admiration. She walked toward them with confident steps, looking straight into the boy's eyes. "Where do you go to school?" "At the local public school, ma'am," Diego replied, maintaining his polite tone. "And do you plan to go to college?" "If you can get a scholarship, yes. My mother can't afford it." Jennifer smiled, but it wasn't a pitying smile. It was the smile of someone who sees value where others only see labels. She pulled a card from her purse pocket and handed it to him. "Call me on Monday. I have friends at Stanford, MIT, Yale, people who love talent like you. And believe me, Diego, you don't have to be elite to be elite." Diego took the card carefully, as if holding the beginning of a new life. Carmen squeezed her son's arm affectionately, trying to hold back tears. What they were experiencing there was more than victory. It was justice. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll call." "And you're going to study," she finished. "Because the world needs minds like yours, not just to play, but to lead." Victoria watched the scene from afar, sitting alone. In her chair, the guests had already dispersed. The laughter had died down. The room was empty, but the echo of humiliation still lingered. Hamilton's cell phone rang, and he left without saying goodbye. The last waiter was blowing out the candles at the head table, and Victoria didn't know what to do. For the first time, her influence was worthless. As Diego and Carmen walked out the massive oak door, the night outside seemed different. The Beverly Hills sky had never seemed so open to them. Diego looked at his mother, holding the card tightly. "Did you realize what just happened?" "Yes, son," she replied, her voice breaking. "Life opened the right door, and you were brave enough to walk in." On the sidewalk, before they turned the corner, Diego stopped, took a deep breath, and looked back. The mansion now seemed smaller, as if he had shrunk from what he had just seen happen. "She asked me to play as a joke, Mom, but she ended up giving me the platform I needed." Carmen smiled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "And you made her a spectator of her own mistake." That night, as they rode the bus home, among residents sleeping on the sidewalks and shuttered storefronts, Diego no longer thought about the game he'd won, but about the game of life that had just begun. And now, for the first time, he knew he had the right pieces. 6 months had passed since that silent night in Beverly Hills, the night a simple game of chess turned the world upside down. Today, Diego walks the halls of Stanford University with the same calmness with which he moved his pieces on the board. A simple t-shirt, a backpack, and a focused gaze. He's not there by luck, charity, or chance. He's there by merit. Jennifer Mills kept her promise. She didn't just connect him with a full scholarship. She made a point of telling his story on social media. The video of the match went viral, surpassing 3 million views in 2 weeks. But it wasn't the game itself that moved the audience. It was the silence of a boy who responded to humiliation with intelligence, who chose to win without stepping on anyone. Victoria Wittmann, on the other hand, was never the same. Her name was removed from 3 philanthropic boards. She lost partnerships, lost friends, and worst of all, she lost the respect of a social circle that had always cheered her out of fear, not admiration. She tried to justify herself in interviews, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she wasn't prejudiced, just playing with the boy. But no one believed her, because the world watched, and the world understood. Diego never responded publicly, never attacked, never posted an indirect message. His response was to create an online social project, Checkmate at the Barriers, a program that connects young people from poor communities with chess mentors, logical reasoning, and even academic guidance. In less than a semester, more than 1,200 young people were learning not only how to move pieces, but also how to understand that strategy, patience, and preparation overcome any prejudice. Carmen, now a housekeeping manager at a luxury hotel in Santa Monica, hung 2 paintings on the living room wall, a photo of Diego receiving an honorable mention from Stanford, and a screenshot of the first virtual class of the social project he created. "The pride of my life," she would tell visitors. And Victoria, well, one day, she saw Diego on TV, being interviewed by CNN. He spoke calmly, with a sparkle in his eyes, and when the reporter asked if he held a grudge against the woman who tried to use him as a joke, he smiled and replied, "Grief is a piece that gets in the way of the game. I prefer to move the ones that lead me to victory." Victoria turned off the television and sat alone on the white leather sofa. For the first time, she understood that what she had lost, no amount of money in the world could buy back: her reputation, her respect, and the chance to have been a better person. Meanwhile, Diego walked steadily across campus. He knew the game of life would have many boards ahead, but now he had something no one could take away: the power to inspire, and that was his true victory.